America. I'm your host, Taylor Brennan, and today we're going to talk about the tragic economy of the Great Depression. So, what first happened was an economic slowdown in which the GDP slowed but did not decline. Then a recession occurred in which the GDP dropped lower than the projected GDP. The GDP continued to decrease, and this caused the extreme state of a recession, which is depression. On Thursday, October 24th, the market plunged. Then 5 days later, on Black Tuesday, it crashed. The market lost 12% of its value and $14 billion in investments. 2 months later, stockholders lost $40 billion in investments. Although the market crashed in 1929, the unemployment rate wasn't its lowest until 1933. With me today, I have Arushi, who is an economic expert of the Great Depression.
The stock market crash in 1929 occurred on October 29, 1929 on Black Tuesday. As stock prices rose to extremely high levels, the stock market became an easy way to make money. Middle-class citizens used most of their disposable income or even mortgaged their houses to buy stocks. By the end of the 1920s, hundreds of millions of stocks were being bought on margin. As prices began to fall in October, shareholders began to panic and rushed to liquidate their holdings, which caused banks to fail. Fearful customers started going on bank runs. They would try and withdraw their deposits in cash. By 1933, 1/5 of the banks in existence in 1930 had failed. Because many of the banks were closed, there was a decrease in consumer spending, business investment, and a loss of consumer confidence. Buying on margin and buying on credit also helped cause the Great Depression. Buying on margin meant that people could become rich overnight by buying and selling stocks. When buying on margin, the investor pays a margin of the stock price and borrows the rest from a stockholder. The purchased stocks became collateral for the loan. As long as the stock prices kept going up, the system worked. The stock market crash caused people who bought on margin to be in severe debt. Buying on credit meant that people began buying stocks with money they didn't have. Consumers became too confident and inherited too much debt that they were unable to pay off. Another factor that made the Great Depression worse was the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act. This piece of U.S. legislation was passed on June 17, 1930. It raised import duties in an attempt to protect American citizens, but it ended up adding considerable strain to the international economic climate of the Great Depression. A number of American trading partners retaliated by imposing tariffs on U.S.-made goods. As a result, world trade fell by 2/3 between 1929 and 1934. Another cause of the Great Depression was an unequal distribution of wealth. The richest 1% of Americans owns 1/3 of assets. Since a lot of the country's wealth was concentrated, the wealthy tended to keep the money that the lower middle-class citizens would have put back into the economy.
Go.
Thanks for listening. Now back to your host, Taylor.
Thank you for watching, and come back tomorrow to watch someone who had a first-hand experience with the Great Depression.
I remember during the Great Depression, 1 in 4 people in and around my neighborhood didn't have jobs, and if they did have jobs, their wages were cut by about 40%, and they also worked less hours, so the employment rate rose by 25%, and in this graph it shows from 1929 it was about 3%, and then 1932 and 1933 it was about 24%. We also had to get creative with our meals since there was a scarce amount of food on the table, and I remember that my family had to eat unusual dinners such as ketchup, onion, or mayonnaise sandwiches, and there was no meat or cheese with it. Also, since the unemployment rate rose so fast, many people turned homeless, or people who owned farms or houses foreclosed it because they couldn't pay off their debt. Moreover, popular pastimes dropped because they got too expensive, but an activity that stayed in the Great Depression was golf. And this only pertains to women, but more women got to go into the workforce because more men were going into World War II. Not only did this affect the individual citizens, but it also affected the nation as a whole. A major effect that came about because of the Great Depression was that half of the banks failed and depositors lost about $180 billion. Not only that, but people started to dislike Herbert Hoover and his laissez-faire economics because we depended on the government and its spending way too much. Therefore, we went from a pure free market to a mixed market. The wealthy people were also able to buy a lot more stocks during the Great Depression because they were at an all-time low, and they can sell it once they're out of the Great Depression because it'll be at a higher value. To get more jobs, I remember that FDR started the New Deal programs, which helped reduce unemployment rates and gave financial aid to some families.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you everyone who watched our special segment today on the Great Depression. Hope you learned something. It continued.
Not only did this
Continue to
The stock market crashed.
a major effect that
2 months later, stockholders lost 40.
Okay, Arushi?
the unemployment
Although it not
such as ketchup, mayonnaise, or onion sandwiches. Wait, what? Around my neighborhood.
Keep the money that the lower middle class citizens would
we'll edit that.
Yeah.